Well, that's a great jump off point because Gavin does seem and Karen Bass seem like their careers are ending and they're in the last stages of trying to maybe get a little bit more pragmatic based is the word people might use for that, just being super candid. But let's get into a little bit of an update here about the absolute tragedy occurring in Los Angeles. The death toll is now at 25. 12,000 structures have been destroyed. It's mostly people's homes. It's 40,000 acres. That's 60 square miles. I think San Francisco is 7 by 7 miles, right? So this is a lot of space. It's bigger than all of San Francisco. The Palisades and Eaton fires are still burning. And as of Wednesday, 80,000 people were under evacuation orders. A couple of our friends lost their homes, but they survived. But the stories of losing everything are just tragic. Every memory, all your personal documents, photos, art, whatever that you've collected over a lifetime. I just had 2 conversations with people and they were just in shock. The estimates right now of damage are between $135 billion and $150 billion. This is some of the most expensive real estate on the planet. It's 10 times more costly than any other wildfire in history, according to reports. You might remember the Camp Fire near Paradise, California. That's about, 3 hours north of San Francisco, northeast? That one was $12.5 billion, just to level set it. And now people are talking about, and we'll talk about here today, what the recovery and rebuild effort might look like. California leadership, disgraziad across the board. Gavin Newsom. Disgraziad! Gavin Newsom.
Have you had traffic to disgraziad.com with all of this?
Yeah, right now, disgraziad.com is going to be redirected to Gavin or Karen Bass. I don't know which one is more disgraceful.
I mean, it's an incredible troll that you just redirected every week to whoever you're maddest at.
Yeah. Who would be more disgraceful in this situation, Gavin or Karen Bass? I think it's got to be Karen Bass for just being out of the country.
I think it would be quite funny if every week you actually gave an award and redirected the website to the person.
I gave it to Karen Bass this week. And before that, it was Jake Paul for that Tyson fight and the disgraziad.com. But it's the stakes have gone up. Gavin is now doing executive orders. One of them is to make it illegal to lowball offers to impacted homeowners for the next 3 months. I don't know what the point of that is. And the other one is to eliminate the Coastal Act's review of permits for the houses that are along PCH, I suppose. And he wants to extend key price gouging protections, quote, to help make rebuilding more affordable. Gouging is defined as raising the rent or price of other goods and services more than 10% from the last marketed price. But it could be as little as 5%. It's just not clear. And then LA Mayor Karen Bass created a snitch hotline to report on any kind of price gouging and rents, which we've started to see. People are now naming and shaming Zillow and Redfin listings where you can see the previous history of what they were asking for a home or for rent. And obviously the free market is making rental homes double in price. Freeberg, we talked a bunch about this, and I know, Pincus, I don't know if you're comfortable talking about it, but we had a whole conversation about your getting dragged by the Coastal Commission in Northern California. Freeberg, maybe kick us off here on what your thoughts are on rebuilding this area, how this will happen, especially with what we brought up last week. And I think went a bit viral is your sort of talk about putting your thumb on the scale with insurance. I mean, this is, I think, one of the concerning things here is the free market not being allowed to progress previously with insurance and then now with the rebuild.
Well, California's got, at this point, price controls or a mechanism for controlling the change in price on insurance, on housing services, and now they've got this non-solicitation rule. All three, I think, are very challenging to, I think, an appropriate market recovery. Look, the insurance issue is a longer one. If you guys want, we could talk about that. I've got a couple notes I can bring up on the history of how we got to this point. But I think it's going to be one of the biggest burdens going forward, and it could actually lead to a pretty significant effect in long-term housing prices in California because of the way that the insurance market is structured and regulated in California. But if you want, we can talk about that.
Or up or down. What do you think ultimately, TLDR, like, do you think prices are going to go way up here? Do you think this is going to take 5 or 10 years to rebuild these homes? I mean, we've never seen this many structures go down at this price point in a constrained area where just construction is so expensive and hard.
So I think the governor did a good job suspending the permitting requirements for the Coastal Act for affected homes and the CEQA review. Those are very important, I think, suspensions. But he also put in place this executive order for price gouging. And if you pull up the note, Nick, so he basically said California Penal Code Section 396, which prohibits price gouging during a declared state of emergency, will now extend indefinitely in this region. And in the language in that penal code, it says that businesses cannot raise the price of essential goods and services by more than 10% above their pre-emergency price for a specified period. And in this case, his executive order is indefinitely. So on an indefinite basis, you cannot raise the price of goods and services, which generally applies to consumer goods like food and emergency supplies, but it also applies to building materials and services related to housing work. So if you want to attract builders, if you want to attract contractors, if you want to attract electricians and plumbers to go to the LA area, you have to allow the market to do its job. If I'm a plumber operating in Sacramento or in Phoenix, and I'm like, man, I could make some money if I go to LA, you will see an influx of service providers and an influx of goods to support the rebuilding effort in Southern California. That's the way the free market should work. Is there's an opportunity in the market, folks show up, they say, great, I can make money, I'm going to come here and do this work. And as more folks show up, they begin to compete on price, and eventually the cost kind of normalizes, and you end up finding what is now the new fair market value between the bid and the ask. The people that are saying, hey, I'll do the work, they're the ask. And hey, I need people to do work, that's the bid. And you find a price. But the benefit of that is you increase the supply. You increase the supply of goods. You increase the supply of service providers, of contractors. There is a home building dearth right now in the United States. So this is an amazing opportunity because they can now move to LA, build homes. We can get a rapid reconstruction effort underway, except the governor just said we can't pay people 10% higher than what they were getting paid right before this happened on an indefinite basis. And then Karen Bass created a hotline. You can go to LA 311 and report people if they're trying to charge too much. And then the Stasi will come and investigate you and determine that you're charging too much. I understand that there's a strong moral imperative and incentive to say we got to stop price gouging. We don't want people to get hurt. But the second order effect is you're actually hurting the market and you're hurting the rebuild effort because you're reducing the incentive for folks to come in and fill the void in the market that is necessary for us to accelerate the development of 15,000 homes in a very short period of time. The alternative now is people are going to be sitting around, and I already spoke to a couple of friends, I'm sure you guys have, that are like, I tried calling architects, I tried calling contractors, people that live in this area that have been affected. I cannot get anyone to return my call. There is not enough service providers down there. You're going to end up waiting 6-7 years to get your home rebuilt. Now, what do? You own a lot, you don't have a home to live in, and then there's this other thing where we can't take unsolicited offers on the home. That was the other executive order. So if you want to pull that one up, the governor said it is illegal to make an unsolicited offer on a piece of real estate in one of these affected zip codes. I don't know what that happened in Hawaii that makes the governor keep referencing the Hawaii story as if, that there were people that were taken advantage of and we need to protect the citizens of LA. But I'm pretty sure that having an increase in the number of offers coming in for real estate in one of these affected areas increases liquidity in the market, it increases the buying behavior, and that will ultimately drive prices up, and that will ultimately make it easier by having more liquidity for some of these folks who owned burned down lots to be able to sell their lot, take their insurance check, move to another neighborhood, and go somewhere else because they're going to have to otherwise wait 6 or 7 years to build a home.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I think you're a little bit off the deep end with some of this stuff because I think you're not being totally fair in representing what this EO says. And that's coming from me. I mean, I am not a Newsom fan, okay? And I think he is completely and totally incompetent. But I'll just take the other side of this, which is that I read the EO and I actually think it's somewhat reasonable. And I didn't connect the dots with the EO and the real estate market. And the reason is that if you read all of what he said, the EO is hyper-specific to unsolicited offers to a very specific handful of zip codes, and it was time-boxed for 3 months. So he said, making any unsolicited offer to an owner of real estate property located in the areas encompassed by, and he names a bunch of zip codes. I think there was like 1, 2, there's like 12 or 13 of them. Okay. So unsolicited, okay? To acquire any interest in real property for an amount less than the fair market value of the property on January 6th, so before the fire started. And
before the homes burnt down.
And he said that's prohibited for 3 months. That's it, for 3 months. And the reason I think he said that is that if you just scope out a little bit, just from this moment in Los Angeles, the problem is that after natural disasters, there is a spike in fraudulent activities. And there are people that try to take advantage of that situation to make money. So for example, after hurricanes, we saw this in Florida, people pose as contractors. They come in and they offer inflated prices, they offer poor quality of work. And especially when you sort of deregulate for that moment, where there's less checks, there's less folks involved because you're trying to speed up the process, you can have a bunch of pressure tactics that work against the best interests of the person trying to rebuild. On the wildfire side, there was this crazy thing, Nick, I'll send you the link from KTLA that talked about these folks called fire chasers, which are essentially like, wildfire scammers. They're ambulance chasers, but during fires.
Okay, so
my point is, I don't disagree with his incompetence, okay? And I think he is totally out of touch. I think there's a broken cartel that runs this state that's going to drive this state into just complete disrepair. He was grossly negligent. Well,
they're already,
you can't say a state that has $322 billion budget is already bankrupt. It's teetering on a path where we won't be able to return, and we can debate that. But my point is, I just think, despite all of this, he's grossly negligent. Karen Bass is grossly negligent. The California cartel is breaking this state. But on this specific narrow thing, I kind of will give him his flowers. I think it was like a decent, smart, good thing. It's narrowly focused. There's a specific window here that's time boxed so that the worst behaviors of other people are roughly managed and mitigated until we can figure out a better answer.
You're saying that unsolicited offers on real estate can drive fraud?
What you talked about, if there is a person that is, this does not prevent somebody
and by the way,
from selling.
Let's talk about services separately because he has a separate EO on services.
This does not prevent anybody whose house burnt down from listing his lot.
That's right.
You could sell it for $1.
That's right.
So I think it's not right and it's inaccurate to say that this is perturbing and distorting the free market. The idea that you cannot sell isn't what is in this EO. The idea is some person shows up out of the blue and applies a pressure tactic to you when you're in a very stressful situation trying to deal with your insurance brokers, trying to figure out where your kids are going to go to school.
But they're just making an offer. What's the pressure tactic? Why can't someone make an offer on your home? You want people to bid up homes.
David, here's what's going to happen. There are people that in the middle of all of this stress are trying to figure out how much money they can get. Somebody shows up and underbids what the true price discovery could be in a few months from now. You don't know whether you have to still pay back your mortgage. There will be people, it will be non-zero, that will make a mistake. And I think that it's good to try to stop that. It doesn't absolve him from his incompetence. But this, I think, was reasonably good.
What about the services piece, Chamath? The fact that you can't increase pricing on goods and services by more than 10% for an indefinite period. Don't you think that creates a disincentive for service providers to come into the state to come and address the rebuild
obviously
effort?
it does, yeah.
This grand ideal of the free market will solve everything isn't necessarily always true. It's great in theory. It reads well in a textbook, but real life is messy. Right now, we are in the messy part. And we are in the most critical part where the abuses will be the highest. I suspect that in 6 months and 9 months and 12 months, the free market will sort all of these things out. So if there's a governor who can implement some checks and balances to protect these folks who are probably totally dazed, like, for example, we know some of our friends. I've spoken to them over the last few days. I've spoken to their wives. Honestly,
They're in shock.
Well, I'll say it in a horrible way. One person said this to me, and I'll just quote him. The amount of people that have reached out to me, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, why would so many people reach out with condolences? I would have thought that one of my children had died. That's what he said to me. And it completely struck me with, it's not on that same level, but the amount of emotional turmoil that these families are going through probably approaches that. I don't think many of those people are in a condition to make good decisions right now. So I almost think a cooling off period actually benefits everybody. It can allow the free market to work in a few months from now. We're only talking 90 days.
No, the services thing is indefinite. That's what I think is a little bit frustrating.
Let me bring Mark in here. Mark, you heard both sides of this debate. If you had a lot in the Pacific Palisades that burned down and people started making unsolicited offer, listen, you're sophisticated. I've known you for 20 plus years. You're very sophisticated, obviously. But do you think that's a reasonable thing to do, to put a moratorium on people making these low bid offers? And then we'll get to the construction piece second. But, what do you think of these?
Unsolicited offers.
Yes, unsolicited offers. Yeah. What do you think of that?
I think what bothers me about it, there's a presumption, and maybe Chamath's right in it. You're getting me to think about it a little more than I was, but I'm pretty much where Freeberg is, that we're kind of treating these people like children, because what we're saying is that they're not capable of making good decisions. So we need to protect them from themselves. And we're saying, so we don't want you to know that somebody is willing to pay X dollars for your property because you might take it and you might regret later that you took that, is kind of what Chamath is saying.
No, in a very narrow window where you may not have the best and clearest ability to make the best decision for you because you're dealing with so many other crazy issues in your life.
And
you could still say no.
You could say no, but you're presuming there's one side that bothers me that feels like what we've had from the Democratic Party forever, which is that this big, wise overlord that's going to protect us from ourselves, from our worst natures. And then on the other hand, you're bringing up something, Chamath, that I hadn't thought about, that I'm just thinking more about now, which is, well, maybe people could be taken advantage of at the margin because they feel like they're in a dire position. But if they think they're in a dire position, they might really be in a dire position. So they might really
Well, for example, let's just say that you haven't heard back from the banks that own your mortgage about whether there's going to be a moratorium on mortgage payments. And so now you're trying to juggle paying for an extra rental and this house while you're trying to figure out where to put your kids. And somebody shows up and says, hey, I will buy this from you. I think that there are a lot of people who would otherwise be able to make a much more rational decision who may make a panic decision in that moment. And I think that if you give people a 90-day cooling off period, I think it at least shines a light on whether all of this governmental and other infrastructure can actually do something for these people. I do think that there is a moment at which you can't govern these things. And all I'm suggesting is a very narrow window of time where people's feelings of just like desperation are at their highest. I think that this is a decent thing to do.
There is some precedent for the state doing stuff like this. In most states, there is a cooling off period with marriages and divorces. You have to wait 3 days to file either way, to get married or to get divorced. Let's talk about the construction process here, Freeberg, because I think that's the most important one, because we're going to rebuild. If you don't pay a premium to get somebody to leave another market to come to this one, which is what's going to be required. There are simply not enough construction people in any state.
That's right.
So now you're competing with another state.
That's right.
This immediately triggered the debate and, dare I say, courage that Travis had around this issue with surge pricing for Uber. Lyft and Sidecar and a bunch of other folks who were kind of virtue signaling were like, we don't ever want to do surge pricing. Therefore, there were never cars on the road on Friday and Saturday nights when people needed them, or during, inclement weather, snowstorms, or on New Year's Eve. And he said, if you want to increase supply, we believe Uber should have availability. Lyft took a different decision. We're going to have no surge pricing. And they just simply weren't available. So maybe, what do you think about that piece, Pincus? You think that the free market and people should be able to say, you know what, I'll pay you time and a half to come here. I'll pay you double time to work Saturday and Sundays. I'll get a couple of RVs, put them in the back if you want to have some folks live on the construction site. And if you hit these dates, I'll pay you a bonus for hitting it. Doesn't seem like any of that would be wrong to me for somebody who had the ability to pay an incentive for somebody to move from another state would be out of line here. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, I'm pretty much just a free market believer. And so I think other than guardrails, like Chamath's saying, and maybe I like the idea of cooling off periods, it kind of makes sense. But outside of that, when it comes to service providers, yeah, you have the opposite problem right now, which is, like you're saying, you need to incentivize a huge construction force to come to LA, and the cost for them to get there to find housing themselves is going to be even higher, or the amount of distance they're going to have to travel every day. So I think this could have real unintended consequences and just stop the wheels from turning on rebuilding all these homes, or just make it way more complex. So I agree.
Chamath, any final thoughts on the rebuild and the free market in that regard? Yeah.
I think this is where the government ineptitude is at its worst. I think that we need to dismantle this regulatory state that makes doing the right thing impossible. So specifically, the thing that Newsom did was essentially create a time expectation on when things will get permitted. And I think he said it was like 6 months. The problem is, like, this is what just goes to show you how insane the state has become. Even if you get a permit within 6 months, and this is where I do agree with Freeberg, like getting service people in and being able to build something to spec safely is going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and it's going to be insane. And the example of the complete incompetence of the California state government is if you contrast and compare this with how the state was able to respond in the Northridge earthquake. And the crazy thing, which I thought was incredible, was after the 1994 Northridge earthquake, they rebuilt I-10, right? Which is like, that is like a crazy artery, in 66 days. Guys, they rebuilt it. Not they permitted it, not that they were trying to get the California Coastal Commission to opine on it, not a Sierra Club lawsuit about the upper land grouse. They rebuilt it. So you actually know what's possible in California if tradesmen are allowed to go to work.
Yeah.
They can build incredibly complicated things with safety, with speed. This is where Newsom, I don't think, understands how the real market works. Because if you looked at that example, the real question you should be asking is, well, what has changed? Well, technology has gotten way better since then. The people are more skilled. There are more people to be able to do more of these jobs. And so why does it only take 6 months to just get the permit when in 120 days you could just rebuild an entire highway? Similarly, why aren't we saying that we expect these homes built in the next 3 years? Get these kids back in their homes and back in school.
You know what they did on that? They offered a $200,000 per day early build bonus on that program back then. So they basically, the state declared, we need this freeway reopened, and here's the date. It was like 144 days. And they're like, you'll get a $200,000 bonus for every day under 144 that you deliver it.
So
And
clever.
so, yeah.
Wow.
Show me an incentive, I'll show you an outcome.
Exactly.
The really interesting thing here is there are regulations that this is a unique opportunity to put in place. Nick, if you can pull it up, there was a home that wasn't burned in the Pacific Palisades, and the architect talked about some of the design decisions there. having stonescaping around your home, gravel, etc., and using these new materials, and not having overhangs, and then having vents into your attic, which is what a lot of homes have, and the embers get into the attic. There's an overhang, and they're not using, and they're all wood built. None of this is concrete, none of it's brick. California's all wood, and so they probably should add some regulations about building things that are fireproof. Because if you had 100 homes that were all fireproof and built to withstand this, that would act as a natural break. And if you didn't have as much vegetation, so there's probably a series of things that should be added here in terms of regulations while you're getting rid of some of the ones that are slowing you down.
Right.
But let's pivot over to, and then finally, like allowing people to park their mobile homes in these places to have housing for construction, to your point, Mark, would be super critical. And they block that kind of stuff. So when you need temporary housing in California, you can't do it.
By the way, I want to hear what Freeberg has to say about insurance, but let me connect the dots between what you said and what he's about to say. There are 3 images I just want to show you guys. And to bubble this up for everybody that isn't necessarily living in California and is consumed with what all of this means, there's a bigger trend across the country that I think is just worth putting out there. So Nick, do you want to just show the first chart from FEMA? So this is basically a graph per locality all over the United States where FEMA tries to assess the disaster risk for living in a given area. And what you see here is that there's some risk in living on the eastern seaboard, and there's a lot of risk, and it's growing, for living on the western seaboard. And the 2 most complicated states that have to deal with this are clearly Florida and California. So that's one, which is, this is a problem that isn't just focused on this one little area. So then if you double click a little bit further, there's a company called CoreLogic. They publish a lot of real estate data. Here's a chart about the Western United States that just double clicks into wildfire risk. And I was shocked when I saw this. This is, first of all, most of California. This is like Nevada. This is Arizona. This is parts of Texas. This is Washington. I didn't even know the fire risk went up that high. But this is essentially a lot of the Western United States. And then the last chart goes through and it actually does, CoreLogic does an assessment of the value at risk. So in California, it's $750 billion that are at about 1.26 million homes that are at moderate or great risk of fires. In Colorado, it's about 141 billion. In Texas, it's 88 billion. In Oregon, it's 45 billion. In Arizona, it's 36 billion. The point is that everything you said, Jason, now needs to get scaled out, meaning there needs to be a national level conversation. This can't be a bunch of city planners making code and making laws in a little municipality.
Yeah.
Because that problem, what that shows you is we have a multi-trillion-dollar risk to a lot of people in the Western United States, specifically around this issue, that has to get dealt with by code.
All right.